When we bring up the topic of lens whacking, the most common response we hear is, "What is that?" Lens whacking, or free lensing as photographers sometimes call it, involves taking the lens off of your camera and maneuvering it manually with your hands to manipulate the focal plane and allow light to leak through the cracks between the lens and the camera body. This technique creates some really interesting qualities in your footage. The bottom line is, the results of lens whacking are sort of hard to explain. Let's take a look at some example footage. You can tell from the footage that the focal plane when you're lens whacking is very dynamic. Some shots have areas that have a split focus. In other words, there might be an object in the foreground and background in focus, while the middle is out of focus. In this segment, we'll show you how to lens whack and talk about lens choice, shooting position, camera settings, manipulating focus, and controlling light leaks. Keep in mind that the first rule of lens whacking is, there are no rules to lens whacking. It's meant to be experimental and give some pretty unique results. It also just happens to be a lot of fun to shoot this way. Lens whacking is an artistic endeavor, and while this means there's no right or wrong way to do it, there are some techniques you can use as a starting point to achieve great results, and it begins with lens selection. While you can lens whack with just about any lens and body combination, certain lens body combinations work better than others. Good attributes to look for in a lens are short focal lengths, small mounts, loose focus rings, and manual exposure capability. Trying to lens whack with a long lens will make it tough to get steady shots. A 50mm lens or wider works great with a full frame camera, while a 35mm lens or wider works for an APS-C camera. A small mount will make it easier to tilt your lens without the mount itself catching on the body of the camera. A loose focus ring will allow you to actually manipulate the focus while holding the lens with one hand. Manual exposure is great because without it, you'll have to reattach the lens or use a variable ND filter if you want to change the exposure you're shooting at. We've tried two different setups. First, we tried the 5D Mark III with an L-Series 50mm EF mount lens. Then we tried the 5D with a Nikon 50mm f-mount lens, which was smaller and far easier to work with. Okay, once you've got your gear selected, it's time to set up a comfortable shooting position. So grab your camera and prop it against your chest. Then disconnect the lens. Your camera will most likely exit live view and the mirror will block the sensor. Hitting the start, stop, or record button will typically reveal the sensor again. Now hold the lens from underneath with one hand, making sure you're also supporting the body. And place your other hand on top of the camera with your fingers extending beyond the body. Your bottom hand will be used to manipulate the lens and focus, and your top hand will be used to help block or reveal light hitting the sensor. Now this might feel a little bit awkward at first, but after a little practice, it does get easier. If this position feels a bit too shaky, you can use your right hand and grip the body, though you'll lose some control over the incoming light. Now let's talk about camera settings. Manipulating your aperture, focus distance, and frame rate can give you different kinds of results. When it comes to aperture and focus, most people suggest opening your aperture fully and setting your focus to infinity. These settings definitely work to give you some great focal plane effects as well as great looking light leaks. You will need a neutral density filter to control the exposure using these settings outside. As we shot, we found ourselves changing the aperture and focus from the initial settings to get different effects. Closing your aperture down will reduce the focal plane effects, but keep your shots sharp while still allowing for light leaks. We also changed our frame rate from 24p to 60p so we could slow down the footage in post. Now if you want to know more about getting perfect slow motion and you're a Plus member, you can watch a full video tutorial by clicking on the link. In this case, the slow motion helped to enhance the surreal feel as well as minimizing noticeable camera shake. There are three ways to manipulate the focus when you're lens whacking: tilting the lens, physically moving forward and backward, or turning the focus ring. Tilting the lens changes the focal plane, but also affects the amount of light leaking into the sensor. If you've got the right amount of leak and you're not quite focused where you want, try moving forward or backward a bit to get the right spot. Of course, if your focus ring is loose enough, you can try turning the focus ring while shooting, This is pretty tough at first, but after a while, you do get the hang of it. Finally, let's talk about controlling the look of the light leaks. You can do this by positioning the camera, using your hand, or using natural elements. Let's start with camera positions. A hard light source like the sun or a tungsten light works great for creating interesting leaks. Positioning the camera so the light source comes from the side gives more pronounced leaks with more intense highlights, while putting the source in front or behind the camera gives a subtler wash of light and color over your image. Of course, if you're using the shooting position we suggested, you can use your hand and fingers to block or reveal light coming into the sensor. Finally, you can use natural objects like trees to block and reveal light. In this shot, rather than using our hands, we let the sun peek through the trees as we move to create the leaks. Lens whacking is an art form, and like all art, what suits one shooter may not suit another. One thing's for sure, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot. While it might feel a touch awkward at first, it only takes one shot where the light and focus come together to create a beautiful image to get you hooked on this technique. So go on out there and try it. Thanks for watching.